All right. Thanks, Raul. So I don't know if we'll tell you everything that you need to know about paying for college, but we will certainly give you a framework for how to think about that and what some of the decisions and options that you should at least be aware of as you're making this kind of decision. So if we can go to the next slide, let's take a look at what we're going to be doing today. Today, we're going to be focusing mostly on the decision-making process, the very basic questions about, should you go to college? Why would you want to go to college? Why is college worth the money, given how expensive it is? And we'll go through some of the detail on those trade-offs relative to pay and employment. And then finally, we'll get into the how to start to decide what that direction that you think you're interested in is, the type of degree, the costs for that type of degree. And we'll touch briefly on funding because next week, chapter 2 is basically all about funding. You can see a long list here of different sources of money that are available in one form or another for paying for college. Grants, scholarships, there's federal funding, there's state funding, loans of different types, how to choose a private lender. There's some important issues that you need to be thinking about. Of course, there's saving for college, and this gets into what is your time frame for going to college. And then finally, we will touch on what do you do when you are ready to apply for college, some of those basic steps in the process. And keep in mind that following up this workshop in January, we will be talking about continuing education, which is also a two-part workshop, and addressing the possibility that college isn't the only way to learn, and sometimes not the best way, depending on your goals. So again, getting back to the very beginning of this presentation, as we think about what are your goals, and you can be thinking about, does college lend itself to meeting those goals best, or perhaps a continuing education approach might be better. Something to be thinking about, and we'll touch on that again and work through that in January. So with that, let's move to the next slide. So should you go to college? Everybody thinks, yes, what a great idea. And absolutely, college can be a very good idea. But I think most people are well aware that college is very expensive. And that's an important question. Is it worth that cost? Well, college is worth the cost for many people anyway, if you graduate. This is it sounds simple, but it's a very important point. And it really is the backbone of the question, are you ready for college? Think of that 18-year-old who doesn't know what to do, didn't particularly like school, is a bit of a wanderer. Is it really worth going to school, college, when you don't know why you're there? And perhaps are not going to spend a whole lot of time paying attention to what you're supposed to be paying attention to. The other side of it is the adult who knows what he or she wants to learn, but there's the family that needs taking care of and the job that needs going to, and it is almost impossible to do that and go to all of those classes. So it's very important to be able to have the time, have the money, have enough space in your life to graduate, because unfortunately, a half a degree is of no value. A company is not going to give you a good job because you went to school for 2 years rather than 4. College is also worth it if you can pay back the loans, the debt that you may have needed to get you through college. And the most important point on this is simply don't borrow too much. And we will spend quite a bit of time next week talking about how to think about what is enough and what is too much as far as borrowing for college. Importantly, college is a good idea, or can be a good idea, if you have a specific goal. Now, we've listed 3 likely goals. The first is probably the most frequent reason that people want to go to college, and that's to get a better job, a good job, a better job. College does open the door, depending on the degree you take, to a number of employment options. Here, what you do need to be thinking about, and this is all about that decision-making process, is what do you mean by a better job? What would that look like? And then how do you get there? There are actually some jobs that perhaps college is not the best choice. And this gets into other ways of learning on a job or outside of a job, but that are not college-based. So something to be thinking about as you think about, I want a better job. It's not always the answer to say, therefore I must go to college. That's just an important piece of the thinking process. Personal growth is very important to some people. It is usually one of the reasons that high school students are ready to go on to college, because they did fairly well in school and they know they're not done. They know there's more to learn. They know they have more growth. And maybe they have an idea of what they might want to be when they grow up, so to speak. But this is a good way to start building that foundation. If you have the interest in learning and the discipline to work, because studying is work. And then finally, for the learning opportunity, probably a smaller group of human beings, but still an important number of human beings love to learn. They go to high school, they go to college, then they go get another degree, and they love it. And they build actually a career around becoming expert. And they will go back for another degree. And they might even go back for a third or a fourth. They're extremely well educated. They enjoy this. And if they can put together a career that is based on their ability to learn, this makes sense to them. And so there are people who can build their own career around just building what they know by going back to school over and over again, or perhaps even becoming part of a school system too, at the much higher level. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, let's take a pause before we get into any more detail and think about, as you are sitting here listening to how to pay for college and some of the basic decisions about going to college, who are you thinking about? Are you thinking about yourself as possibly going to college, or maybe one of your children, perhaps a friend or another relative, brother, sister? How about just in the chat box, who are you thinking about who might be interested in college? Or why are you thinking about being interested in how to pay for college? And also indicate in the chat box, when might this happen? In a year or two, 5 years, 10 years? What do you think? Anybody?
We don't have anything yet. Come on, guys.
Nobody is thinking about going to college? Nobody has.
Mona says she is for next year.
Ooh, for next year. That's pretty soon. Excellent. All right.
How about Iris or Wen or Grace?
Maybe in 1.5 years when I perfectioning more my English, when
Okay.
I finish the class, the LCNC.
Okay, so a little bit more English and then maybe move into the next step, which would be college. All righty then.
Yes.
All right, and Muna says she's looking at getting a master's degree for 2 years.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else want to volunteer any information? Grace or Wen?
There's nobody has children in this group, apparently. When we've asked this question before, we sometimes get my 9-year-old, but there are no kids in this group, huh? Okay.
All right, let's keep going then.
Yeah, thank you. Deb?
All right, so Barb led off with, is college a good idea? And one of the reasons that we think it might be a good idea is if you know that you can afford it and you can pay for it and you can pay loans back. And so why is that a big deal? It's a big deal because if you go to college and you get a degree with the right kind of job in mind, it can help you get higher pay. That usually if you get hired into a job for a specific skill, that you get a higher salary if you already have a college degree. And then there are also a lot of studies that say that if you have a college degree, you're more likely to keep your job, to have steadier employment. So the unemployment has been a very strange thing, obviously, during the pandemic, but generally unemployment is lower. The people who are not in their jobs is lower if they have a college degree, and they are more likely not to have their jobs or have their jobs be very temporary and off and on if you don't have a college degree. And the other reason is that there are things that go with jobs besides just how much they pay you. And one of those, we call them benefits, are things like your employer will help you pay for health care, for health insurance, and they will pay you when you take time off for vacations or holiday or sick. And then there can be other benefits as well. And usually the benefits for those jobs are more likely when those are people who have college degrees. Okay, and I just want to go back for just a minute. Grace says she has 2 daughters and they're interested in how to pay for college because they're going to go at the same time. So that's a good thing for us to know and keep in mind. Okay, so I'm going to go now to the higher pay numbers, and these are just some examples. They're things that we pulled off the internet, so you can't say it's exactly going to be what you see, but just so you see some of the differences. Generally, an average salary for somebody with a high school degree or GED degree is about $35,000 a year. It goes up when you have a 2-year degree, what we call an associate's degree, at $41,500 a year, and then a bachelor's degree, which is a full 4-year college degree. Those people can get about $59,000 a year. So it's a big difference if you look at the difference between, 59,000 and 35. So just something to keep in mind. But of course, also the salary depends on the kind of job that you have. And so some jobs have higher pay than other jobs. So the kinds of jobs that generally we see with higher pay are in engineering and technology and science and math. Okay, and then we also talked about the employment and the unemployment and whether you get to keep your jobs. And so again, these are not necessarily numbers that are coming out of this recent COVID pandemic, but on average, people who are more educated get to keep their jobs longer. And so the unemployment number, the people who are out of jobs, you can see was higher for the people who had the high school degree, and kind of in the middle for the associate's degree, and pretty low for the bachelor's degree, for the four-year degree. Okay, so any questions up to this point before we go on? Any comments? Anybody? You can put it in the chat box. You don't have to say it out loud. Okay, we'll keep going then. Barb? Barb, you're on mute.
Sorry. Now that we've talked a little bit about some of the benefits and the differences with different degrees, you might be thinking about, well, what type of degree should I be thinking about? And that really gets to the question, and back to that question of what is your goal? What is the job that you want? Is, in the first place, is it what kind of area? Are we talking healthcare or business or technology or education? Some of those areas pay better than others, something to be thinking about. But to Deb's point on an earlier slide, different degrees will lead to different jobs with different pay levels. So for example, that associate's degree, AA, which is usually 2 years, some of the job examples would be the physical therapist assistant, the radiation therapist, those are in the medical profession, legal assistant, working for a lawyer, for example. A nursing assistant would be another one. So those would be jobs that you could get with a 2-year associate's degree. The bachelor's degree, the BA or BS, normally takes 4 years. Jobs that you can get with a bachelor's degree would be, for example, an engineer. There are lots of different types of engineers. Operations manager in a business, for example, software applications developer, a lot of tech jobs with bachelor's degrees. And teachers are another big group, and nurses. So you can see there are lots of different types of jobs that you can get with a bachelor's degree. So thinking about that for a minute, we will pause again. And what kind of a job are you or your child interested in? Have you had a chance to think about that for the two of you who are a little closer to going to college? And have you talked to any people about that job, people who already have the job, for example? And have you looked at the degree or the type of degree that would be required to get that job? Anybody want to take a jump and share what they've been thinking about as they think about getting into a degree, going back to college?
Well, we know Muna's getting a master's, so maybe you could tell us what field you're going to be in, Muna.
Muna?
No?
Well, shall I tell a little story just to warm up the crowd?
Oh, no, she answered. Project
Yeah.
management.
Project management, a master's degree in project management. All right. Have you had a chance to talk to anybody about that job? Do you know somebody who has that type of job?
No, unfortunately, she says.
Okay. But you know that, I believe you said it's a master's degree that you're interested in. Oh, and Iris, Nursing assistant. Okay, nursing assistant. So Iris, you're thinking about perhaps an associate's degree?
I nurse certificate in my country.
Oh, you have a nursing certificate in your country. So,
Yep.
okay. So you would like to have the credentials in this country?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. Have you had a chance to talk with anybody yet about how to do that? Do you know anybody who has is a nursing assistant in this country?
Yes, but I think it's more difficult here for get the equivalence.
Yes, I can imagine it could be different or difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Grace,
Great.
Grace says biology. Grace, that's for your daughters? The biology is for your daughters? Okay, good.
Okay.
All right.
So they both want to go into the sciences. And that would offer lots of interesting possibilities as they decide what kind of science in particular they're interested in, and many different jobs can feed off that study. Nice. All right. So we've talked a little bit about thinking about that degree. You've thought at least a little bit about the type of degree that you are interested in that fits your goal. So what might be the next set of things to think about? Well, certainly the first step would be plan your degree program. And what we mean by that is know what courses you need to get your degree. Whether it's you're 18 years old and you're just starting and you're in a 4-year college and you want to major in biology, you're going to want to know what that university's requirements are for graduating with a Bachelor of Arts or Science in biology. And importantly, you might want to consider what courses you don't need, because unfortunately, sometimes people end up with, because they haven't planned carefully, they aren't organized, they don't think ahead, far enough ahead to lay out the courses that they need to get their degree. And they may end up having to take something that they don't really need just to finish school. So it sounds simple, but I know of a number of people who have become frustrated because they ended up taking, well, I could have taken another class in science, but that one was closed. So I ended up taking a class in geology, and I don't really care about geology. So the bottom line on this one is, once you know where you're going, think about what are the courses that are most important to you. Try to make sure that you've lined them up as quickly as you can as you're moving through your program, whatever the program is. Because that is going to possibly save some of the costs that are associated with college if you don't have to take another course just to graduate. And also consider, here are a couple of thoughts on what you can consider as you're thinking about how you get that degree and manage the costs. And one of them is that some people will go to that 2-year school first and then transfer to a 4-year school to save money. I had a student from another country who went to Montgomery College first, got some of her basic studies done, some of the basic requirements, but she wanted to be an accountant. An accountant, you're going to need a bachelor's degree. So after 2 years, she graduates from Montgomery College and she goes on to the University of Maryland, graduates from Maryland with a bachelor's in accounting. Deb is going to share you some of the costs for these different schools, and you'll be able to appreciate the possible cost savings if you use this option for certain kinds of degrees. It isn't going to work for everything, but it's something to consider. Another thing to consider is what is called the College Level Examination Program. CLEP are the initials, and this will get you credit for beginning courses. This can be useful if you studied in a different country and you can't easily transfer those classes that you had or the work that you did in a different country. But there are these examinations that you can take for some of the beginning courses in college. And if you pass, that college will give you the credit so you don't have to take it again. Now, not all colleges accept these examination results. So it's important when you have chosen the college that you want to go to find out, do they accept these examination results? Because there's no point in taking these exams if the college that you're interested in doesn't accept them. But something to know about. And finally, for those who are in US high schools, there are advanced placement courses and tests. And for those individuals who place highly enough on the tests, what that does is these are our courses that are given at the high school level that are college level, so that if you test high enough, then when you apply to college, that college will say, okay, you've already done this class, you've already got the right level grade, so we give you that credit. That's one less class you will have to take. So it's good to know for those of you who have children who are thinking about going to college as a way to, again, manage the costs a little bit of a degree program. Okay, moving on to the next one, Deb.
So Barb talked a little bit about how the costs are different and what you want to understand before you really look at which colleges you want to attend or you want your children to attend is to really understand what they cost. And there are a couple of rules. One of them is that the two-year colleges, like the community colleges, are generally cheaper than the four-year colleges. So the example that Barb just gave you for the accounting, where the person took 2 years at Montgomery College and then transferred to the University of Maryland, probably saved quite a bit of money. And then the other rule is that public colleges and universities, if you belong to that grouping, are cheaper than private ones. So if you go to the University of Maryland, being a Maryland resident, it will be cheaper than if you go to a private college. Now, if you are going to a public school, a public college that is out of state, sometimes they can be almost as expensive as the private schools. So you want to think about that. And there are costs that include a couple different things. So tuition is what they charge you for the courses. But there are also a bunch of fees, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And you need to be aware of those as well. So we'll talk about those in a minute. But if you just want to look at an example of what I talked about before about those two rules up at the top, Montgomery College, which is generally a 2-year. If you are a Montgomery College resident, it's going to cost you about $5,000 a year. If you go to the University of Maryland as a Maryland resident, it's going to cost you about twice as much every single year. And then if you go to Johns Hopkins, which is up in Baltimore, but it is a private institution, that's costing a whole lot more. It's costing 5 times as much as the University of Maryland and 10 times as much as Montgomery College just for 1 year. So you can see that, you know, for 4 years at $53,000, that's $200,000 plus that it would cost to go to that school. Now that's not, we're going to talk more next week about how to pay for things. So it doesn't mean that you have to pay for the whole entire thing, but still just keep in mind that these are a lot of costs that you need to be aware of, and you need to make really big decisions about how to do the costs and how you're going to pay for them and how long you're going to have to pay for them. So we just talked about this, that in county is cheaper than out of county, in state is cheaper than out of state. I think you understand that. If you go to one of the state schools in Virginia, you're going to pay more money than the Virginia residents. The people who come to our Maryland schools that don't live in Maryland, or who go to the community colleges but don't live in those counties, they pay more than you would if you went to Montgomery College or to the University of Maryland. So again, just an example is, I told you before that if you went to Montgomery College, being residents of Montgomery County, you would pay $5,000, but again, you would have to pay almost twice as much if you were out of county, if you lived somewhere else. And University of Maryland, which is about $10,000 for residents, would be about $36,000, almost 4 times as much if you lived out of state. So let's take another brief moment to ask you guys, which colleges are you guys looking at? What have you thought about? And are those the community colleges or University of Maryland or somewhere else? So Iris and Muna, you guys sort of have an idea of which degrees you want to go for. Have you thought about schools yet? University of Maryland for Muna, good. Good. Okay. So that's probably a very nice decision for you for a master's, that you would need to go to the 4-year, the larger school, but that gives you the advantage of being a resident and getting the lower tuition. And Iris says Montgomery College, so the same thing for you. Probably a very good and financially wise decision. Okay, so when we compare the costs of different schools, remember I said that there were 2 things. There were tuition and fees. And so some schools have a lower tuition, but then they charge you more fees. Some people have a higher tuition, but then they include a lot of things in there, and so you don't pay as many separate fees. So things that are fees and that you will be charged for separately from the cost of the class itself are things like facilities or technology that you would have to pay for some of the computers or usage of it. Parking, shuttle services. If you have kids going to a residential college, you would have to pay for their housing and food. So all of those things, there's books. Those are all things that are going to be on top of the tuition. And so those are all costs that you should plan for and understand before you go to school. And then the last thing that we're doing is we're giving you a website here to go check things out. And so you don't have to do all of the research on your own, because there are a lot of organizations that do some of those comparisons. And this particular one is run by the United States Department of Education, and it's called the College Scoreboard. And what they do is they compare different schools, and they factor in a lot of those costs that we talked about. So they talk about the tuition, they talk about the fees, and they talk about how you might be able to get some other monies to help pay in a grant. And we're going to again talk about that a whole lot more next week. And some of the money that you can get for loans or grants or scholarships depends on your income. So to the extent that you share all of that information with the schools, they may be able to give you better help. And it's also a good place if you haven't decided on schools. So, you know, we have 2 people who have decided on schools, but for the rest of you guys, and certainly for Grace when her daughters are still pretty young, it gives you an opportunity to compare some different colleges. And the other thing, if you look at these last couple bullets, these are really important. So the graduation rates means how many people actually can get through the school. And a lot of times what that means is that the school is helping you get through your courses, make sure that you have the right things, like Barb was talking about, for the degree that you're aiming for, that you have the right courses, that you can get the degree, and that you can help schedule your time or help work with how to get money for paying for college, because you want to make sure, remember we said at the very beginning, that college is only really worth it if you actually get the degree. So if you just took a course or 2, that will be good for your own knowledge, but it doesn't necessarily help you with getting the job, the better job, or the pay, or the guarantee of employment being steady. And the other thing is the post-graduation salaries. So there are schools that have a better reputation, and they are able to help you earn more money when you go out to do some job hunting. And a lot of times the schools will have some counselors that will help you look for jobs also. But the reputation, a reputation is a word that means how good is that school? And there are some schools, and particularly recently in the last couple of years, that have been in the papers that they don't do a very good job of educating people. They charge a lot of money. The people don't always graduate. And then when they do graduate, they can't pay back their loans because it was so expensive, and the salaries that they're earning for those degrees are not paying for themselves. And so you want to know what the reputation of the school is, and you want to make sure you have a school with a good reputation. So for the 2 of you that are looking at Montgomery College and University of Maryland, very good reputations and good graduation rates and good histories of helping people get jobs and keep them. So that's just a really important thing for you to think about when you decide to think about how much a school costs and whether it's going to be worth it or not. So I'm going to turn it back over to Barb.
And we're going to wrap up with just a few thoughts about funding. We've spent most of the time talking about the costs of college education. Now we're starting to switch to funding, or ways that you get money to pay for college. And this is what we're going to focus on next week, but we wanted to give you a little bit of a framework to start your thinking. There are basically 4 major sources of funding, at least in this country. Grants and scholarships are the first 2. In both cases, this is money that you can apply for and you don't pay it back. You don't need to pay it back. There are different rules and so forth. We'll get into that detail next week. Then there are student loans, lots of different types of student loans. This is money that you will have to pay back. And in most cases, it's both the loan itself and the interest that is created by taking the loan out. And finally, there is savings. In other words, there are different ways of saving money to be able to use it for going to college. There are different types of personal bank accounts, and probably the more interesting and well-known version of this is what's called the 529 account. And we'll get into what that is and how you can use it, especially when you have a longer timeline. So while, yes, you could get a 529 if you wanted to go to college in 2 years, the true benefits tend to accrue when you are thinking about your children who it's 5 or 10 years or more until they're planning on, well, they'll be old enough to go to college. So we'll get into all of that detail next week in quite a bit more detail. And so with that, we'd like to wrap up this presentation with just a quick review. Today, what we were talking about was that the thinking process and the decisions that go into that thinking process about going to college, why you should go to college, and what are the costs and how to manage those costs, whether it is worth the money to go to college. And Deb gave you quite a few reasons why, yes, there are definitely some benefits, but that needs to be managed so that you get the benefit and you don't get caught just with the costs. We did talk a little bit about the types of degrees and the trade-offs as far as what they cost and what you get for that, and started the transition, if you will, into now that I'm down this road, I'm moving toward going to college. How am I going to pay for it? What are the opportunities and what are the cautions that you need to know about to make this definitely a valuable asset, because certainly an education can be an extremely valuable asset. So with that, let us turn it back to the group for any further questions or comments. Does anybody have anything else that they would like to add or ask? Are we all?
Carol, you're on mute.
Oh, okay. Would it be a good idea at this point to talk about the additional costs that you will incur if you decide to go to a college far away from where you live, where you might live in a dormitory and have to eat in the cafeteria, which we call, of course, room and board at college? Or is that something you plan to cover next week?
That's a really good question, Carol. We don't address that directly. Deb talked about the numbers of the different types of fees. And we focused our attention on those organizations that are close to home. Because obviously when you go out of state, not only do you get that increased cost of tuition if you aren't living in the state that you're going to school in, but then to your point, yes, you're going to have to eat and you're going to have to sleep somewhere, and it won't be in your own home. So those costs can become even more dramatic than those numbers that Deb was showing. Deb, why don't you jump in, because you are the cost guru here.
Yeah, so you're going to have all of those costs that we're talking about. You're going to have a place to live. You're going to have to eat. You're going to have to travel if you go far away.
Oh, right.
And so that's a big cost if you need to fly, or you need to take a bus, or you need to have a car. So there are a lot of different things that you want to figure in the total cost of what it's going to go to of what it's going to cost you to go to a particular school and then figure out if that's worth it. So, you know, I do know of people who went to schools that were farther away, but it was where they could live with a relative. And so they saved some of those costs that we were just talking about. I have talked to some people who said, you know, I won't be right there, really close by, but I can drive there and I have a car. So I'm not going to have to pay for a separate, excuse me, a separate place to live. So a lot of that really depends on the costs that you are willing to pay for, that you can afford. And when we talk next week about how much you can get for a scholarship or a grant, that's money that you don't have to pay back. Sometimes that's worth it to go farther away because other people are helping you pay for school. And sometimes schools, and again, we'll talk about this a lot more next week, sometimes the schools will help you with some good loans. Or sometimes it's not a good idea because it's just way too expensive and you don't think you'll be able to pay it back. So there are always stories, you're going to hear them in the news a lot, about people who have trouble paying back their student loans. And if you remember, Barbara mentioned the fact that it's not just the money of what it costs you initially. So if it cost you at the University of Maryland $10,000 a year and you had to borrow the whole amount, you're also going to pay interest on that. And the interest is going to keep growing for a longer amount of time that it takes you to pay back. So you just need to think about all these things. It's very complicated. There are a lot of people at all of these schools that can sit down and help you figure out some of the costs that you're going to need and plan them. We're not going to talk to them about, we're not going to talk to you about all of the things in every detail for you personally, but you should know that there are people who can help with that.
Excuse me?
Yes.
The help depends on how much you earn.
Sometimes, yes. So a lot of what you get, some of those other things that we're going to talk about next week, scholarships or loans, depend on how much you earn. And then the other thing that you need to think about is if your children are going to school and you're helping them pay, then your income counts for that. But if you are going to school yourself, and that means that you're in a full-time job, but you're going to have to take that down to part-time to be able to go to school as well, you need to think about the changes in your income, and you need to talk to those people who are going to help you with the funding so that they know that too. Did that answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. All right, who else has a question or comment?
I have a question. If you, for example, my son attended the private school, is the same opportunity or is more expensive?
Say that again. He's in primary school now.
No now, but I had the family attended at the private school now. 3 years more, I need to go to the Montgomery College or university. Is the same the opportunity or no? If you stay at the public school or private, is my question.
Are you talking about a private school?
I have a nephew attended at the private school now, but if you attended at the Montgomery College, is the same for the other people attended at the public school, the cost?
So if he is part of Montgomery County, then the cost will be for an in-county person, an in-county and state person. The other thing is if he lives somewhere else, but he came to live with you and you could prove that he was living with you, then you might be able to get him in as a resident of Montgomery County at the lower rate.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so I think we turn it back to you, Raul.